When I was working at Bleeding Fingers, there were three things that company does. You do, as I describe it, there's library work, there's work for picture, and work to picture. Essentially, what that means is library work. You write a track, it's 3 minutes long, it has good edit points, it has a mood, a general mood. It sounds like something. It's never some sort of new idea, but it makes money because it sits in a library, and then Google wants to use it for an ad, and you get a few $100 in royalties.
Yeah.
Wonderful. It's great. There's music for picture, which is, let's say, and this happens a lot, and it happened a lot. Master Chef is doing a new season. Let's say season 12, I think I worked on. So they put in an order with Bleeding Fingers for 200 tracks. They bill Bleeding Fingers. Bleeding Fingers pays us our salary, and the whole company of around 20 composers or so will write a few tracks each, maybe two or three each, to fill out this order over X amount of time. That's kind of music specifically for something, but really it still is just a library. You're not writing to picture. There's no dramatic process here, really. And then there's writing music for picture, which is the proper, you're sitting down with the scene trying to figure out and write something. Okay, like this person's doing this. Do I want to Mickey Mouse this, which is kind of matching what's to picture? It's a term that calls back early animation of Disney. Or do I just kind of want to ride underneath this? Like, how am I going to process this? What am I going to do? What does this sound like? Well, what does the director want? Like, it's that whole looking at the screen and figuring out very prescriptive
Mm.
Creation. And so, having done so much of all three of those things, less so of music for picture, because I didn't do a lot of those track orders, thankfully. What I began to notice was a very clear distinction between craft and art. And I think there's a time and place for both. But in realizing that distinction, some things got easier, some things got harder. So writing library tracks got much easier because, oh, wait a second, I don't have to do anything artful with this. It's all craft. I know exactly what I needed to do. And with Master Chef, there are 11 seasons prior to this that already have an established sound. So I just follow what I need to do. That's an exploration in craft. But in working on craft like that every day, what slowly started to become harder was the artistic approach, or at least leaning towards the artistic approach, which I would say is, the writing for picture, the prescriptive writing for picture. You almost stop thinking of it artistically and you start thinking of it from a craft perspective. Now, we'll come back to this. I think that is a good thing, but at the time I was terrified by it because I was like, well, no, as a young composer, I was 24. I mean, I'm still young, but at 24, I was like, no, I need to have a unique voice. And everybody in school told me that I need to be different and I need to have this and I need to have that. And this is my identity. And I have to establish myself as an artist. I'm coming to realize that I just think that's bullshit.
Yeah.
For just to be kind of uncouth, I think is the right terminology there. I really do. I just think it's bullshit because what I've seen happen, and this is now the return to what I said we'll come back to later. What I've seen happen in the past 10 or so years, in my industry specifically, is kind of the post Hans era. Hans was kind of an artist when he got into the industry. And around the same time, 80s, 90s, artists started coming onto the scene for film scoring. And when I say coming onto the scene, I also should give a little disclaimer here, historically speaking. There were multiple waves of film composers that came into Hollywood. You have the immigrants, and before the immigrating composers who were coming here to escape XYZ in their own country, they were composers in their own right. They're coming here to explore film and that kind of thing as composers. After that, it was like two generations of that before you got the actual like American composers like the John Williams and the Jerry Goldsmith and the like. And I think it took some time for American composers to get a root in that. And shortly after that, then you have the short little jazz era. John Williams also is kind of a part. I mean, he's 93, so he's been a part of so much of the history of film, which is part of the reason why he's so great, one of the best. So you go from these illustrious scores that are representative of the music of these other cultures, these immigrants who are coming in, Nina Rota and these big grand, all of this kind of stuff. Then you get these American scores, which are these uniquely not quite jazz, but of something else, if I may say that. I mean, I think American culture, what is so beautiful about it is that it is kind of a melting pot, and it takes from all of these other different cultures and creates something new out of it. And then you have jazz, and then you have 80s, you get into the synth scores and all this kind of stuff. So you can kind of see that there's a push towards artistry anyway, that is natural of American music, and certainly what we appreciate. So when you look at it from that perspective, you get into the 80s, and these artists start to come onto the scene. So then people start hiring artists. Now, artists have worked on their craft and have become artists and explored their voice before they're discovered. It's not like, oh, we're going to find this artist and turn them into an artist. It's like, no, you're hiring the artist because you want what they've already been doing, you know. And so much of what they've already been doing also is honing their craft so that they have a unique voice, or chasing after a unique voice so hard that it develops into this beautiful, this art, this brand new thing that hasn't really existed, but it is so full of craft in and of its own right. I mean, Jacob Collier is a great example of that. He's an artist who is so craftful, maybe not in the standard way of doing it. I was just watching a TikTok or an Instagram reel of him recording with a trumpet player, and he's literally just singing the pitch that he wants the trumpet player to play. He's not writing parts. And then he layers everything over itself, and it is a beautiful, complex chord that he could have written out, but he did it faster, and he
Yeah.
did it in his own way. That's a completely different craft, but he's an artist. So I guess where I'm getting with this is, film music started hiring artists in the most recent years, and in hiring artists, in some cases, hiring artists to do a craft form, which we've kind of established in our previous conversations, which is coming in to lay down carpet. It's a process. That's difficult because the artist kind of wants to do what they want to do, but you're in an industry that doesn't always support that. And certainly in a job, being a film composer, that doesn't always support that. So in a lot of times they need a lot of help. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's just a different process. But yeah, so you see a lot of very artistic composers who come onto the scene. They might have been rockers or guitarists or that kind of thing, who come onto the scene because, oh, we're really looking for, like, let's say, a rock guitar artist. Well, a rock guitar artist might not know how to orchestrate.
Yeah.
So they do need to bring on an orchestrator, and that orchestrator needs to have a team because of the amount of work well, they might not know how to deliver stems for something. That might be the first time they've ever heard of stems. Well, you're going to need an assistant, you're going to need this, and you're going to need that. So you start seeing these teams develop around artists, which is
Mm.
beautiful. And it's a completely different way that things used to be done. Talking with an older composer that I know who owns the studio that I work out of in Burbank, he was like, yeah, I mean, when Hans came on the scene, he created an entire little, almost like industry, brand new way to do this job, which is having a team and leaning on that team respectfully to help them get your product shipped. And you are the head of the ship who's just pointing it in the right direction, creatively as well. I mean, Hans's ideas are wonderful. So now let's go back to the beginning of this question that you asked. When I was at Bleeding Fingers and I was realizing this and experiencing it in real time, when I was in remote control and seeing this kind of machine that Hans had made, no disrespect, that was not at all what I wanted to do. I wanted to be somebody who was a craftsman, who was kind of in control of my craft. And if I may go further, without disrespecting true maestros, and this is kind of a soapbox. I think my goal, or what I could hope to aspire to be, is a modicum of the maestro that somebody like Leonard Bernstein or John Williams became. And not in a way that I want to be John Williams, I want to be Leonard Bernstein, but in a way that they were, calling back to our previous conversation, in complete control of every aspect of what they were doing. When Leonard Bernstein got up to conduct, I mean, yearly I will watch him rehearse the recording, I believe, of the soundtrack release for West Side Story. And it's fascinating to watch him work. And when I see him working, it's not working out of question. It's not working because he's repeating something that somebody on his team said, "Hey, you should do this." It's him working because he studied these scores. It's him working because he studied conducting. He is a master at every corner of the craft that is creation, and not only creation, but also bringing execution, bringing that to life. I want to be somebody who isn't afraid to get up in front of an ensemble and rehearse that ensemble with my music, because I know every note of what I've written, of what I've orchestrated. Now, I also want to conduct the ensemble, rehearse the ensemble. I want to be able to have a conversation with the mixer. And now this begets a different conversation. What does it mean to be a craftsman and or maestro, quote unquote, in the common era? Well, that does look different following the way that Hans has kind of revolutionized this industry, because you do still have to have a team. There are expectations now that are completely different than what they were 40, 50 years ago. I mean, let alone 10, 15 years ago.
Yeah.
Because the industry now for 10, 15, 20 years has gotten so used to people having a team that can turn things around very quickly. You've always written an episode of TV a week. So, 30, 40 minutes of music a week. But because the tech has changed, there's so many more people involved now. You can't mix everything yourself. You don't always have the money to just go to a stage and record the score and, okay, everything's taken care of for me. You do have to have a team. So to me, the definition of maestro has shifted a little bit, in that it also includes being able to have a conversation with your mixer about what you might want from an EQ perspective, from a saturation perspective. Now, not getting in the way of what they're doing. They still need to be able to do their job, but knowing enough about what it is that you're putting your hands into to be able to know what you're asking for. And that is what I see when I see the maestro, John Williams. When I see them work, is they know how to communicate with everybody involved on their team and or otherwise to be able to get the desired thing as the final result. And when it comes to the art and craft conversation, now the direct answer to your question, what I see currently and what I have seen of the past is most of the best artists that I know, film music, contemporary music, visual art, dance art, whatever, are incredible craftsmen. Incredible craftsmen. Now, whether or not that comes from the process that we kind of distinguish between whether they were artists first and then got really good at whatever craft they were and redefined the craft, Jacob Collier, or whether they studied and practiced the craft to the best of their ability and took that and ran with it, John Williams. That's what I see, and that's what I have the most respect for, because it is almost a selfless act of looking at everything before you, as we've talked about before, paying so much respect to it because you love it. It is this beautiful creation. Again, I keep saying beauty because I think it's such a perfect word for what we're talking about, and being able to move forward while respecting all of that stuff and being able to change with the dynamic expectations of what this industry brings you. And I think that is what I am interested in. And as I see some of my young contemporaries come up and absolutely love and hone in on that craft, I love it. I love what I'm seeing from young composers. I love what I'm seeing from my young artistic contemporaries who are doing things that are trying to break the boundaries of what we're doing. I respect all of it and I love all of it. But what I want for myself is for somebody to ask me a question and for me to have an answer, because at some point I've had my hand in every single pie that is being made, because if it's got my name on it, I want to be the person that's doing it.
Yeah.
And even if I'm not the person that is directly in charge of the work, John Williams didn't mix every score he's ever done. He didn't mix any of the scores he's ever done, but he knows how to get the orchestra to sound really good in the room. So I think working on those skills, I think, is so valuable, at least to me. And the time that I spent at Bleeding Fingers, the time that I've spent afterwards, and what I see in the industry both before and ahead of me, that's where I'd like to find myself in the craft versus art debate. I hope that next year I work on something or something releases or whatever, and somebody gives me a scathing review that says this is the most unartistic thing that I've ever listened to. Well, that's great. That means I'm right in line with what I'm kind of striving for with myself, which is I want to build a very, very solid craft-based foundation so that by the time I am asked to do something artistic, it's an expression not only of my artistic learnings over time, but also the craft that I have accrued over, at that point, maybe hopefully decades of work and learning. But that's where I currently stand on the art and craft debate. And so many people, it doesn't matter. Like it absolutely doesn't matter. And I think there's room, and that's again the nice thing about it. There's room for both. There will always be room for both, which is nice that I get to choose, what side of that fence, albeit a fence that doesn't even need to be made or called out, but I get to decide where I'd like to go, even though I don't get always decide what note I get to put on the page with my industry.
Thank you so much for tuning in to Micromaker by Loose Leaf Transmissions. We hope you enjoyed this brief glimpse into the inner workings of the creative life. If this resonated with you, be sure to check out the full conversation on Music Maker with Tyler Kline, a podcast exploring craft and process, philosophy and inspiration, and the honest, often messy parts of being an artist, creative uncertainty, purpose and identity, and resilience. You can find Music Maker wherever you get your podcasts or by visiting musicmakerpodcast.com.